So this afternoon, we have a very, very special session, which is about home educating your adopted child. I know of a lot of home educators who either have adopted or want to adopt. And we know there's some challenges when you're wanting to adopt, and social workers may not know of the benefits of home education or understand the benefits. So I think it is important that adoptive parents certainly understand how it can make all the difference in the life of a child who's been adopted. So what I want to do is introduce our speakers today. So first of all, we have Molly, who, well, I'll get her to say, but I mean, you guys can take over as soon as got you on here. And we have Sean, and I know all of these ladies personally. And then this is my very special friend who I'm so excited to have at Learn Free this year, because she supports me every year and encourages me every year. And Vanda and I have known each other since 1983.
We met at the end of 82
yeah.
when you were 18.
Yes, and I was going to the same university. I met Vanda. She was already at university studying social work, and I was headed to the same university, and we just connected, and we became friends pretty quickly. And have been friends ever since, and have walked a long journey together with our children, and sometimes living in the same cities. Yes, it's my heart friend, and very, very special person. And so I'm delighted that she's here at Learn Free to share from her experience and her immense wisdom. So thank you. So were you guys going to do introductions? Who's starting? Yeah. Well, you can tell us a bit about your backgrounds then, all of you.
Vanda, you go first.
Okay. So, yes, I'm Vanda, and I work for an agency called Integrate, and I work mainly with children that are adopted, young people, students. I've got some children that are at university, and my role at the moment is I'm a therapist. I do have a long history of working with families and children in a variety of settings. Originally trained as a social worker, and then became a therapist, transitioned into a therapist. So very briefly, married. I have 2 sons. They're both married. I'm going to be a granny in October, and you can hear from my accent I'm South African. And yeah, I think that is in a nutshell what I want to say about me.
Molly.
Okay. I'm Molly. I've been home educating for years and years. Our eldest, so we've got 4 kids. Our eldest is 19 and our youngest is 9. So the 2 oldest, we home educated through to college. One's at university now and one is at college. And then our 2 youngest are 12 and 9, and they are both adopted. So we very much went through the adoption journey as a family. I think home educating was really helpful because the boys were with us the whole time. So although obviously we had to keep some things, from them, but we actually were very open, and they definitely talked about we are adopting. So we did it as a family. And I'm still home educating the 2 girls, and I've also written a book as well, which kind of charts which came out last year, which called Kite's Tail. It's in the exhibitor's booth, and it kind of charts our journey. When we adopted, there were very few books around. In fact, there were none at the time, that you could read to your existing children about adoption. So if one has a pregnancy, then you can go to the library and get a book all about mummy's having a baby out of her tummy. But if you're adopting, there was absolutely nothing. So actually our social worker suggested that I write a book. So years and years later I did. So that's out now. And I also do with a friend of mine, Helen, co-host a podcast called Mended Teacups podcast, which is also to kind of hopefully to support home ed families. That's me.
And I'm Sean, and we have 3 adopted children who came to us as a sibling group way back when. They are now 12, 11 and 10. All 3 children started school, and it was actually thanks to dyslexia that we even thought about home education and ended up jumping all into home education. I used to be a secondary school teacher for an awful long time before we adopted. So with the primary school the girls were at, I did work very hard with the school to develop a very good relationship with them, and to build up policies and systems for all adopted children in the school. There were quite a few actually. I think the school got quite well known for it. So we built up all sorts of support systems. But it was dyslexia that got us into home education. But since then, that was 3 years ago, I think the fact that our children are adopted and for all of their emotional needs, I can see how they are thriving with just the time and the space that they have, and the time with us that they have as well. So we are very grateful to dyslexia. There you go.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of let you guys run with what you've got. So do I need to spotlight you, Vanda, and take the others off?
Okay, and then Juliet, do I spotlight people when I'm finished?
No, just tell me, because I don't think you have that power. I've got the power.
Okay, right. So I'm assuming that the people attending or listening to this talk would be people that have already adopted and are home educating, or children are currently in school and they have adopted and they're considering home education, or people are considering adopting and home education. And some people may be friends or family of people that have adopted and are home educating. So I'm hoping that what Sean and Molly and I have prepared will be helpful for people. We've kind of come from the basis that there's so much out there. How do we put this together in a helpful format? So we started off with knowing that we all have a history. And one of the things that I find as a therapist is, as a birth parent, I know a lot about my child. I know my child's developmental history. I know the conditions under which my child was conceived. I know the birth history, the pregnancy history, the birth, the days following after that. And I have a pretty much a good idea about all that history. But often with adopted children, you don't have that. And what I would encourage people that are considering adoption is to find out as much as they can about adoption. And this also includes the pre-birth information. And so what I would like to present is information based on the neurosequential model of therapeutics. And this was designed by Dr. Bruce Perry, and I think he's become very well known by a lot of people. He's an American psychiatrist. He's also a neuroscientist. He's the senior fellow of the Child Trauma Academy in Houston, in Texas, and he's also recently co-authored the book, What Happened to You? And he did that in collaboration with Oprah Winfrey. But he's over 30 years developed a model to help us understand how the brain develops. And so that is what I want to present to you today. And if I can get my slide show up now, so I share. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. Oh, I'm always so happy when it works. So just firstly, to remind ourselves, what is trauma? So Trauma refers to multiple traumatic events in the life of a child. And these traumatic experiences usually begin at a very early age and are caused by the actions or the inactions of adults who should have been caring for or protecting the child. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So as you are listening to the talk and you're considering, okay, I'm going to adopt a child, or I have adopted a child. Okay, so what are the kind of traumas that my child may have been exposed to? At what time in my child's developmental history has my child been exposed to any trauma? I'm going to use the picture of a house. So with a house, you have the foundation, the walls, the windows, and the roof. The neurosequential model of the therapeutic says that the brain develops from the bottom to the top. So on the first level, you will have the brain stem. And then the second level is the cerebellum. Then you have the third level, which is the limbic system. And the fourth level is the cortex. And the brain stem is responsible for eating, chewing, sleeping, emotional regulation, temperature, and sensory integration. The cerebellum is responsible for eye movements, balance, coordination, the development of the vestibular system, and fine motor coordination. The limbic system is responsible for relationships, attachment, peer relations, and your social development. And then you get to the cortex, that's responsible for planning, memory recall, learning, learning and reading, understanding time, and learning from cause and effect and organization. So for a normal a child without trauma, our hope is that the brain develops from the bottom up without any trauma, and that it would develop in a natural way so the child will be able to do what they need to do at the different developmental stages. But unfortunately, with children that are exposed to trauma, the research is telling us now that the first 1,000 days of life, so this is from conception through to the child's second birthday, this is a critical period for the brain development. And the brain actually develops exponentially, and all the information that comes in through the senses, we know that is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and the touch. That is how that information comes through the brain stem. We've now also learned that maternal prenatal anxiety is associated with adaptations of the fetus. What we see in therapy is that often children are removed at birth and they're placed in foster care, or they don't even leave the hospital. But in later years, see what why are there problems? The child was removed, and our understanding is that the child was not exposed to traumatic events. But we've now learned that fetal defenses develop during pregnancy, and the imprints made during this period can be strong enough to shape basic perceptions and beliefs about oneself and the world. And so it is interesting that the brain somehow learns that this is a dangerous environment and I need to make adaptations for when I am born, that I can survive. And so we see that children are often, and they are children that are exposed to domestic violence in utero, drugs. They are born, and Dr. Bruce Perry refers to this as that the child's emotional regulation thermometer is set at a higher level. So the child is basically born with already a defense, the defensive system is already sensitive. So important to know what happened to my child, under which circumstances did my child develop prior to being born. So it's important to keep in mind the child now needs to learn, and they're struggling with learning, okay, to think about the brain. So, okay, the brain is developing from the bottom up. Abuse comes in very multiple types of abuse. We know that there's chronic abuse, and there's neglect. We know domestic violence. All of these kind of things, these are the things that we consider abusive or traumatic events. So this is a picture here of half. If we slice the brain in half, just looking at the puzzle, how the brain is developed. So now you have this child in the class, and the child has to concentrate, and they're struggling to learn, because any new information that feels threatening means that the thinking brain can go offline. And now what do we do to help this child? So the neuro sequential model of therapeutics suggests that our interventions are focused on from the bottom up. In other words, we put in interventions, or we help the child to get this thinking brain back online. So this means it may be regressive. In other words, what do we do now to get that brain to get back into a window, the calm window of tolerance? So I'm just going to stop sharing here. So I don't know if people are familiar with the polyvagal theory, but that basically says that we have a parasympathetic nervous system, and we have, let me just get that right, the parasympathetic, and another word has just gone out of my brain. But basically what that means is that we have an ideal window of tolerance. And we learn best when we are in a calm window. If we see that the child is becoming hyper aroused, so there's a lot of movement, the child has to learn, but there's lots of movement, then we know, okay, if the child is not in the ideal window of tolerance, it will be very hard for them to learn. Their thinking brain is now offline. I need to do something to calm that brain, to get them back into that ideal window of arousal. If my child is shutting down, going into hypoarousal, or there's a freeze response, what do I do to get my child back? So I need to put in activities that can get my child back into that ideal window of arousal. Because if they are out of their window of tolerance, it means they are not taking in, they're not learning. The other thing that we also need to remember with traumatized children is that on one day they can learn things, and you just think, wow, they're taking in all this information, they're learning, and then tomorrow they are in a different place. So learning is very much state-based. Is how the child on that day is able to participate in learning. The other thing that I find with children, even in the therapy room, is if their threat response has been activated, they are functioning in a hyper-aroused state, which means something has triggered, there's some or other stimuli has come in, and that is now deactivated their thinking brain, the cognitive capacity. Then I need to say, okay, what was threatening about this that I have presented this child? Is something being triggered? Now I know this is just really a snapshot, and there can be a lot of different things. And as Sean has mentioned about dyslexia, so what does that mean for a traumatized child? You know, how does that impact? What do I need now to help my child to make use optimally of the learning environment? So some of the things that we have found is very, very helpful is that the child needs a patterned, repetitive, predictable environment. Because the children were exposed to so much chaos and transitions, they need that. They need it to be predictable, to be patterned. They need to know what is going to happen. The other thing that I also want to remind people of is the brain's plasticity and the ability to change. And that within an environment where there's time, the parent spends time with the child, take time to explain what has happened, make sense of the stimuli that is coming in. All of those things help towards helping the brain heal and repair. And one of the things I just want to kind of end my bit with is that adversity makes us vulnerable, but loving relationships help us to repair. So I think I will put this over to Molly and Sean now, if they want to share from their own experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Vonda.
Who wants to go next?
I'll go if that's all right. Thanks, Vonda. It's such a good explanation. And as you were speaking, the thoughts that came to my mind from our experience are that most people accept and understand that children are removed from their birth parents for good reason, so that there has been trauma at some level. I think it's what's not easy for everyone to understand who hasn't been involved in adoption is that early life trauma is a part then of your child's life. It's something that they have to deal with. Even if they present as other children do, they are dealing with early life trauma. And I know for us in our experience, having to explain that, or sometimes just choosing not to bother explaining it, depending what the situation was quite a big thing for us. And so from everything that Vonda has said, I think the biggest challenge facing my husband and I was the need to parent in a very different way to how we had been parented. There is a term used now, therapeutic parenting. And of course, this is quite alien to us. You know, rewards and sanctions is quite a normal way of being brought up. It's quite a normal way of schools and how they function. But for a child with early life trauma, that kind of punishment, or even sometimes reward, we learned, can actually add to the trauma. So yes, because of everything that happens in the brain and our children's responses to situations, because the freeze or flight, and there's even a flop, isn't there, Vonda? You know, reactions they can have, we've had to learn to do it in a very different way. So I was interested in what you're saying about the brain, because when our children were younger, we've kind of grown out of it now. We read these wonderful books, and so we talked a lot about the brilliant brain, the cortex, and the dinosaur brain, the reptilian brain. And so if it was all kicking off, we trained ourselves to use this new language of, oh dear, your dinosaur brain is roaring. And when your dinosaur brain is roaring, your brilliant brain can't get in, can't be heard. What is it that we need to do to get your dinosaur brain back to bed so that your brilliant brain can start to make sense of what has happened? And that was incredibly helpful for us as well as for our children, because it gave it a different language. It meant in our best moments, and we've not always have our best moments, but in our best moments, it allows our children to come back into that window of tolerance that Vonda was talking about. And so there is no punishment for this outrageous, seemingly random tantrum, but there is time to process what was that really about, what was going on in your brain at that moment. And even as young children, they could start to grasp this. And I think it empowered them, actually. And when we did it well, I think it really did empower them. So one child needs to be on her own. Another child needs to be with me in order to get back into her window of tolerance, which is sometimes quite a challenge because my dinosaur brain has kicked off in the process as well. So that's sometimes quite an interesting situation. But we all talk about our own dinosaur brains and what we all need. So the girls know that I need to load the dishwasher when my dinosaur brain is roaring. Just let me load the dishwasher. It takes 2 minutes. And then my brilliant brain will be able to function again. So that's just a small example of just how differently we have had to learn to approach what is going on in our children's brains. Molly, how about you?
Oh, thank you. Well, I have to say, first of all, Sian, I can testify. Sian is brilliant. Her brilliant brain works in an amazing way when the girls kick off. So it's wonderful. We all go out together with our 5 girls between us, and as they do, little girls kind of kick off and they can have arguments and all the rest of it. And Sian is so good at bringing them together and empowering them to be able to say how they feel about it. You know, what one child has done to help, what that does to make the other one feel whatever they're feeling, and then how to put it right. And she's brilliant at doing that. And she's the only mum I know who has to do that all the time. Her children, and she's much better at doing that than I am. So, but it really, really pays off, and so it is a different way of parenting. And I've learned loads from Sian just watching her parent her girls. So thank you. So definitely testify to that. So ours, I guess our journey, because we'd had 2 boys by birth before, our adoption journey was actually a very long one. And so it meant that by the time that we actually had the amazing excitement of bringing our first little girl home with us, she was very much long awaited, much expected. And any training we'd had about the difference was like in the background of several years before. And so actually most of what we've our social services is quite tight for lots of stuff at the moment, so it was even then. So most of we have mainly worked out ourselves, read books, watched occasional videos if we found, just trying to work it ourselves, talking to other adopted parents. So we haven't, I think, very initially we talked to I started parenting our first daughter in a very similar way that we parented our boys, because we thought, that's worked okay with them, so they seem to be doing okay. And actually after a while we realized that wasn't going to work. We had to be different. And I think even more so with our second child, who experienced really quite a lot of trauma and was older when she came to us as well. So we very much learned, and are continuing to learn, that we have to do things differently. So just one thing, which might explain to parents who have birth children and not adopted children, just a little thing. When one of our kids fell over and grazed their knee, if it was one of the boys, I'd just say, oh, never mind, I used to be a children's nurse, so actually a little graze isn't really a great big deal for me. So it's come along, get up, don't make a fuss kind of thing. And I started doing that first with our little daughter, who was, quite a rough and tumble little child. And I realized that actually she didn't respond very well to that. And it kind of cottoned on that actually she needed a lot more. I needed to go and make a really big deal of it and say, oh, I'm so sorry, you poor thing. Oh no, don't worry about if your shoes are scuffed. It's just so long as you're okay, and I really had to make a big deal of it to somehow there's something in her that needed to know that she had been hurt, and I really, really cared about her. So that's just a small thing. I think as when it comes to home ed, our girls had never been to school. So again, it's really encouraging to hear Sian talk about the difference she's seen with her kids. It is hard work home educating, parenting and home educating children with trauma. They often come with extra things, as Sian said about dyslexia. One of our kids, actually one of our birth children and one of our adopted children, they're dyslexic. And just the difference with that actually. So with our birth child who is dyslexic, I was able to say, okay, then let's just push through for another 5 minutes. Then we've done another 5 minutes, and you can go out and kick a football around, but let's just push through it. And he'd concentrate, and he'd do it, and then he'd get a real high five, yeah, I've done it. And he'd get a real sense of achievement. Then he'd go out and kick a football and get all his, I'd go out on the football. But I can't do that with our adopted daughter. We absolutely have to go with the flow. I totally identify with what Wanda was saying about you have to go with that window. That on a good day, we can do sort of 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, which is of word games, maybe probably on the floor a lot of the time playing. She's 9, she's just now starting to sit and to read some of the Oxford Learning, Reading to Read, those books. But very, I simply, if she can't do it, I just can't say, come on, we just have to put it aside and try something else, because she just doesn't have that. It just stresses her even more. So it's a very, very slow process. Things like, I think early trauma can affect their concentration. So she has very, very limited concentration. Like she just couldn't concentrate on anything to begin with. And now I think that's the time thing that Sian was talking about, that actually, because we have time, when both the girls came to us, they just spent hours and hours and hours playing. And I think playing role play is really good, because they can play out harmful experiences. They can also try and kind of work out kind of new relationships and new things as well, through being able to play creatively. Manipulation. So often children, if they're a bit old, they can come with language. Both of, certainly the younger one came with quite a speech delay, and also motor delay as well. It's just the time. They would absolutely not be on a similar level, which with the government or whoever it is decides that all children at 5 should be able to do this, that and the other, and we all know as home educators, kids don't learn to potty train at the same time, and they don't learn to read, and if you at the same time, if you have a child with a background in trauma, that takes even longer. And so shame is often a big thing. And actually, I think however much in a class, probably a teacher would very much try to not put a child on the spot and put shame, but actually I think it just would inevitably happen, whether by the teacher or by another child. And they have a real fear of failure. So whereas my birth children would go for it, and if they didn't make it or they failed, well, never mind, we'll try again tomorrow. Whereas actually for both of our adopted children, they have a real fear of failure, and so they won't try new things. They find it very difficult to try new things. They have to be feeling very secure to try something new, and we have to kind of to build up to that. Rabbiting on to Wanda was talking about patterns, and I think probably all know most of our children really thrive off patterns. Certainly one of our birth children very much thrived off pattern. But what I've noticed with the girls is that with the boys, we would have our pattern, our normal pattern or rhythm during kind of school time. But then when it came to the holidays, it would just be, oh, that's great. we would just chill a bit, and they'd come down and have some TV in the morning, and that was like a real treat, and not have to get dressed and have their breakfast in sitting in their pajamas and everything. But actually with the girls, I've discovered I can't do that. They have to, if we don't get the day started off in the completely normal way that they normally do, we just the day goes to pot. So I've had to learn different ways around it. They still have to come down and still have to have all their morning regime. So what I would think as is a treat, and it was a treat for the boys, and then it might take a few days to get back into normal routine, but we'd get there. It wasn't a big deal. I can't do that with the girls. We have to, which means for me as well, I have to keep going. There's a question how old were they were. The first one was 21 months, and the second one was 3. And I think that's the other thing as well, with if you have a child by birth and you're sort of having a kind of story time, then you're sitting there, as each child kind of joins a family. You've got a baby, you've maybe got a toddler, and then one sitting on the sofa and reading, and they kind of join in, but they grow up with it. They kind of just imbibe that actually this is, say, read aloud time, and this is just what we do, and they have it from birth. Whereas if you're bringing a child in from adoption, then they don't know any of that. They've got no idea that when mum's sitting on the sofa reading a story to 2 other children, that actually you can just play on the floor with your Lego. They've got absolutely no idea. So you're starting, how you do meals together. Everything is starting from the beginning, and not only starting from the beginning with a kind of a fresh plate, but actually you're starting with a whole load of other stuff that they've got there. So some of the patterns that they've got and some of the habits they've got actually may not be particularly healthy ones, even just normal everyday things. And so you sort of having to kind of relearn some ways of doing things. So yeah, so it is a real challenge. Spontaneity can be more difficult because they really thrive off the rhythm. But I think, as Sian says, homemade, we were given a huge, it was very difficult for us adopting because they were very, our faith didn't go in our favour way back then, and also nor the fact that we home educated. We had a lot of problems because we home educated. But interestingly now, quite a few years on, and there are lots and lots of families who have adopted children who are home educating, and actually I've even been contacted by social services to come to encourage other families along the way with that. So I think it's recognised now that home education is actually very good for adopted children for all those reasons, that Sian has said, the time, the low stress environment. If they're on a fight or flight a lot of the time, then actually they need to be able to have time to kind of for that to rewire, to relearn. So if they come to you and they're on the kind of all teed up all the time, and then they're having to get out the door and they're going to a very highly sort of sensory, lots of stuff coming into them school environment, and they don't have a chance for them to be able to relearn. So I think that actually, again, home education allows a much calmer environment, allows a much slower environment, routine, allows them to regress if they need to go back to those baby stages when they're 5, 6, 7, to go back to put some of those building blocks in place. And I think also to build up relationships as well, with parents, with siblings, what you haven't had. It's kind of like giving back the years the locusts have eaten. I very much feel that they're kind of redeeming years, and so the times we've got with our girls, so they're kind of redeeming years time. So yeah, I've waffled on.
I think what you were saying about relationships is really key. So I'm tying that in with Juliet's question. Do you think that a fear of failure comes from a fear of rejection? And it is absolutely such a key part of their lives, this fear of rejection, which, as Molly's said, you can build, and Vonda was saying about the plasticity of the brain, you can build new neural pathways. So there is restoration there. But it is all about that fear of rejection and relationship. And, when I was told off as a child, it didn't occur to me that I wasn't loved, that meant I wasn't loved. And that's been a big reality in our children's lives. In fact, I think I don't have to say it as often now, but certainly with one of our children, it had to be an automatic thing. You know, if they were being told off about something, you had this hilarious add-on, and I love you, not but I love you, and I love you. It had to be there constantly. I love you. Da, 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 da. This isn't good when you do this, and I love you. And it sounded ridiculous at first, but it became a very normal way of dealing with a situation, because you could actually see in their faces, oh my goodness, does this mean she's not going to be my mum anymore? What does this mean? And it's, you know, that's slightly heartbreaking. And, you know, I loved what Molly was saying about me. That was absolutely lovely. But I have had my awful moments of failure with the girls. And I think, again, tying that into home education, it is all about that quick repair of relationship. It's absolutely vital. So you've had your blowout. I've done really badly at it. My dinosaur brain has gone nuts. I'm loading the dishwasher. I want to feel sorry for myself. I want to feel hard done by. But what's absolutely key is that I now repair this relationship with my children, because they are in a place, whether I like it or not, whether I want to accept it or not, the truth is they are in a place where they are fearful that they are being rejected, that love is being taken away, that their situation may change. And that is a deep wiring that has gone on, either since birth or even pre-birth, that wiring has taken place. And again, linking that with when our children were in school, lovely teachers, but when you are in a culture of rewards and sanctions, and that is what holds the system together, it just doesn't work. And so that restoring a relationship piece sometimes would get missed, to the detriment of adopted children. And there's no blame there. I've been a teacher. I'm sure I've done really badly at it myself. There's no blame there. But for example, I remember one of my children was given a detention, and I think she was only 8 or something. And I said, well, what's this detention going to involve? It was a thinking detention. She'll be okay. She's not have a break time. She needs to sit quietly for 10 minutes and think about what she's done. So I was thinking, well, how do I deal with this? This is a sanction. And so I approached the head and I said, look, by all means, this is your policy. You can sit her down for 10 minutes and she can, to think about what she's done. The only problem is she won't be thinking about what she has done. She will go to a place of trauma for 10 very quiet minutes. She will wonder what on earth is going to happen the other end of the 10 minutes, and whether the relationship with you, with her teacher, is still going to be the same. It isn't going to change her behavior, but it is going to put her back in a place of trauma. But do what you want. And of course, they were very lovely, and they arranged something else that she could work with a teacher on a task to talk about what had happened. But I think that's just a small example of what you don't have control of in a school environment, whereas at home, you can drop everything to restore that relationship, which for us is, it's become a way of life for us.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, sorry, I was just wondering, shall I bring Vanda in now as well, so the three of you can be spotlighted and continue with the chat?
What you were saying, Sean, it just made me think about relationship. I think, home ed, so often we say our education is relational, that it's all mostly about, it's based on relationship. But I think even, like you say, even more so with adopted children. And one of the things that we do, and we've always done with the boys as well, but we've carried on, is we just practically we kind of do a structured learning on 4 days a week, and then on 1 day a week we have like an outing day, or we do something. So even during lockdown we have still had 1 day, it happens to be Friday at the moment, it's been different days during the years, but it's Friday at the moment, and we call them our Fun Girls Fridays. And we go out and we don't do any structured learning at all, and we just go out somewhere, and that is just basically all about if it's been a difficult week, if we've if there is stuff in our relationships that aren't good, that's about the healing and restoring, and we have some fun and we ice cream, or we just do something which is just lovely. And those are an absolute godsend to anyone who's listening with this with adopted children. I'd really recommend that. Have a day, just a relationship, a fun day a week.
I think the thing that that I would like to also just put on, in our discussion, is the role of oxytocin in attachment, and we call it the love
hormone, isn't it?
a hormone. That's what I was looking for, the love hormone. So what is missing often for the children when they are adopted is that they didn't have that early release of oxytocin in the brain to attach to the birth mom, and so the child didn't come into adoption and is already defensive, and so what you want to do is you want to put in as much activities throughout the day that will promote the release of oxytocin. So it is the eye contact, it is the touch. So throughout the day to bring in, even if it's the hand. So some children are quite defensive, they don't like to be touched, they can resist that, and so you don't want to increase the defense, but you want to put in, I don't want to say sneaky, but parents can be quite you can
Creative.
Thank you, Juliet. You can be quite creative in, yeah, that's a good word, be creative in just in the touching and stroking on the arm, but you want to put in those activities that can promote oxytocin, because that strengthens the attachment bond as well. You probably have done both of that, Molly and Sean. I can hear from what you are saying.
I see we have a raised hand from Ruth.
Yeah, hi. I was just kind of reflecting. I mean, I haven't adopted any kids. It's something that I've always kind of wondered about and thought about. But the way my thoughts are interpreting what you're saying, from someone who hasn't been through it, granted, is just that kind of in terms of if you adopt a child, say you adopt a child at 5, say, when ordinarily at that point they would normally begin to be a little bit independent and asserting the personality. Is it true to say that you kind of have to sort of in some ways view them as like a newborn in terms of your relationship is starting right there, and the amount of care and physical things that you have to do, you have to treat them as though they're like a newborn? And if you kind of see it in that, does that make any sense? So a newborn needs lots of, almost one-to-one care for the whole of the day and sometimes through the night. So to kind of think of it in those terms, when, regardless of the age, you're actually starting from scratch to actually build those emotional things in place. Would you say that that is kind of anyway reflective of how it is? Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah, I would say the best thing is, so if you are planning to adopt, is to have a very good idea of where is that child at developmentally. And it's kind of like the goal to find the Goldilocks principle. You want to not give too much, you don't want to give too little, you want to give just the right amount of attachment-based sort of input. There is so what I normally would say to parents is get to know the child. So normally you know, in the adoption process, you have introductions. So during that period, when children are, you're getting to know the child, you start to build an attachment. So you need to do it slowly. Some children do come, and from day one, they jump in your lap and it's mommy, mommy, and some children are highly defensive. So it really depends on the child, but I think it's very much you go back. It's all the theory is saying you go back and you pick up where the child is, and you put in those early things. But I'll hand over to Sean and to Molly.
I think our eldest was 3, and and from knowing other adopters as well, I think the children themselves kind of lead the way in that. So they were, our children regressed when they came to us. So there was the very clear signs of regression. So, you know, the things that you may not do for a 3-year-old, we ended up doing, and that was good. That was good, and thankfully we had already been prepared for that, and we had, you know, been given the confidence to go with whatever type of parenting or closeness or babying, we used to call it, you know, was needed, and that this is completely normal. It's completely needed. It's what they require. At the same time, we had three children arrive at the same time, so quite different, all needy in that same way, but in different ways.
It's interesting, actually. So there were some questions in the chat, and Jana raised her hand. So Jana had the questions. So she was had a comment there about social services, and also wanted to know where you guys are based, in terms of, I suppose, what your social workers' attitudes were maybe in that area. Yeah. So Joanna, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I have a friend who's in London, and she's got a biological son, 11 and a bit, and then 3 adopted kids, twin girls and a boy, very close in age, all about 10, 11, like these 3. And she adopted them in Romania, brought them to this country. One of them might have dyslexia. I think I have one with dyslexia. So I'm here sort of listening for her sake. She's sort of trying to get the dyslexic twin to keep up. And I'm wondering, what's the right approach? Because you seem to have experience of dyslexia. Do you work harder? Because my approach, but obviously I'm quite different to her, even though she's my best friend, is to back off. But she doesn't want to, in a sense, seem unfair, you know, and she doesn't want the disadvantaged child to feel like she's not working on them enough. But what should I say to her?
Is she home educating?
No, I wish she was. No, they're at a very good school, or all these 3 in the same class.
Well, you answer, Sian, then, because it's probably cool.
I think it's difficult, isn't it, when they're in school. I know with our daughter, because I had been a teacher, I just went in politely, kind of pointed out the futility of her constant spelling tests and her failure to read, and how that was recorded. I did have a good relationship with the school, so I was able to go in and just say, this doesn't seem to make any sense to me, to be working so hard at home on something that she's going to forget so quickly and feel so bad about. Can we stop doing these tests? And I ended up going in, and for my child and for some of the others in the class, the spelling test time was when I would take them out and read to them. and that's how flexible the school was. But it took me to come forward to say this isn't working, it's not doing anybody any good. So I'm not sure that's answering your question. I just think for me, my heart is, that they can't be pushed. They need to know what they're good at. They need to indulge their interests and find out what their skills are. And we do work on reading and writing, but it's very, very relaxed.
I just, because we're talking about home educating your adopted child, I wanted, I know we've kind of touched on this in different ways, but Vanda, I know you see children who are adopted and put into schools, and then you also see children who've been adopted and have been home educated. How do you think home education helps to address some of those attachment issues? I know they might seem obvious, but for you as a therapist, how do you think there's a big difference in the benefits?
I do. So the families that I see that are home educating, the children just couldn't, they just did not flourish in school. They, despite all the input, despite support packages, educational healthcare plans, the gap between the children and the child and their peer became so big that at the end, the school became such a hostile environment for the child, not because people didn't try to work or try to help. It's just they just couldn't manage. The environment was too overwhelming. And so then being at home, everything is calmer. And those children within the calm environment, having the parent there, learning at their own pace, not being in competition with other children for parental attention, because that's often within the school system for the child that is very dependent on the help of an adult, having to share the teacher. It can be quite an evocative cue for the child, because they need the teacher, but the teacher is now helping another child. Even if there's a teaching assistant or two teaching assistants, some of the children where the parents have decided to homeschool, is because the child they just could not function within the school environment, and they're doing very well. Having said that, I also know of quite a few children that have been home educated, and then at a later stage they do so well, then they can go on to college, but they needed that base to catch up. I think
it's the bonding at the beginning, that quantity time rather than quality time in a way.
That I've seen, it's having that parent to that child, and that when they need that emotional co-regulation, they've got that parent there, because we regulate if we become, all of us, if we become emotionally dysregulated, or we need the calm brain of someone else to help us co-regulate. And I think that is where having that parent there's a trigger in that the stimuli come into the reptilian brain, or the what Sian has so beautifully explained. Within the classroom situation, that takes a very long time sometimes for that child to come back into that window of tolerance. And then the class have moved on already, they're busy with something else. And then the child has to, it's like they're constantly playing catch up. One of the children that I see have said to me, I can never keep up. Everybody is always ahead of me. And then I miss pieces of the day, and they're already in break, and I haven't done my work, and I haven't done my sums, and they get the sense of, actually, I can't do this, and that grows bigger.
Yeah. I do know of one family where the son that they adopted, he did go to school mainly because, and this is a family that home educated their own child, but because for this particular child, school was actually his happy place. He liked he liked to push himself academically, and it gave him that feeling of confidence. So they had to, you know, they didn't home educate him, which is quite kind of interesting as well. But I think it is about the child and not about you, you know, recognizing what the child actually needs to be able to feel secure and confident, and so that they can grow and move forward.
I think that's a really important point, Julia. I think for some adopted children, the strict routine of school is actually very helpful. And so if you've got a good team in that school, then it absolutely can be a positive experience. And I think for all three of our children, despite having mentioned a detention, generally there were no behaviour issues in school at all. And yet the fallout would come the other side of the day at home. And actually what we came to realise is that all three, in very different ways, were very hypervigilant throughout the day. And so their capacity for learning, despite being smiley and lovely and presenting generally very well in terms of behaviour, their capacity for learning was hugely diminished. And that became an issue for them, I think, in the end. And that became a frustration for us, that, as I've said, once we took them out because of dyslexia, you could just see for our children that benefit of, whoa, we don't have to worry about these things anymore. So one of our children needed to be sat at the back of the class just because her hypervigilance meant that she was constantly checking the door. Who's going to come in next? Who's going to come in next? And she couldn't focus on anything for any great amount of time without being sat at the back and being able to see everything that was happening and was going to happen. But I think it's a really good point that schools, it's very unique to the child.
Yeah, it was interesting. I sat in a chat with talk with Jessica Parnell yesterday, and she was talking about the skittish amygdala. And basically saying, you know, that the amygdala is constantly looking for threats, and you know, it's how you calm that. You need, you know, it's how you calm that down, because, you know, the child is actually not going to really learn or take a lot in as long as that's sort of doing its thing.
I think the term that helped us was knowing that our children were in their own unique survival modes. And I think if you can look at children through that lens of what their survival mode is, you soon start to understand their behaviour. And our girls, certainly very different survival modes, but they were certainly in their survival modes during the school day, and still are in certain situations.
I'd say we've got time to say a couple of practical things. It just made me think, for people who are, I think there's some people who are listening to this who are home educating their adopted children, and just a couple of things that came to my mind is that it is different, and I think there's been some group chat about your expectations, what you know, why you adopt, and not to feel, it's so hard not to compare, but please, none of us should compare, but please don't compare yourselves and your kids with kids who have, you know, been birth children right from, you know, from birth, and what they might be doing and what you might be doing, because actually, as Sian said, you know, we need a lot more time to do just anything. Our kids will need a lot more time, they need a lot more space. So just practically what that looks like is, in no way do I try to do as much with the girls as I did with the boys. We just don't, because they need everything to be a lot calmer. Everything takes longer between doing everything. You know, with the boys, we could just say, come on, let's just chop and change, and let's go out and do this, and let's do this, and everything takes longer. And I think also expectations, you know, certainly for our younger one, my total what I've been wanting, aiming for, for years. She's 9 now. Is just to be able to fulfill what we talked in nursing about, the activities of daily living. So literally, it's just the independence, and just working on and getting that independence in her to be able to do all those things which normally, by a child is sort of 4, 5, 6, you can expect them, they'll be able to get dressed up, they can put a duvet up the bed, they can empty something, some plates out of the dishwasher. But we are still working on that at 9 years old, and she will get there, and I know she will, and we've got the time to be able to do that. And and I kind of always feel for her, that actually, so long as she can read a bus timetable to get to college at 16, and she is able to just do enough to be able to do functional skills or whatever she needs to do. I'm not aiming for academic high flying, so the pressure is absolutely off for her, which is wonderful. So therefore we do a lot of reading aloud, a lot of listening to stories, and a lot of playing outside, a lot of messy stuff, because she likes that. So it is very, very different. And I think if in a sense, if I hadn't had my birth children, and I think particularly the top one, who's actually quite high achieving academically, I think I could be feeling quite inadequate, like, gosh, we're still working on tying shoelaces, and what are we doing? And everybody else is reading Homer or Shakespeare or whatever kind of thing. So please really give yourself a lot of grace. You do what is right for your kids and enjoy them, build up those relationships, and then when the time has come, they will then learn. They will, and you might find they learn things very, very quickly when the time is right. But I wouldn't push it, to be honest. I would work on relationships, read a lot to them, spend a lot of time outdoors if you can, and just enjoy doing things that you enjoy together.
Can I just go back to, is it Johanna?
Joanna.
Johanna.
Yeah.
Just to go back, because you were inquiring about your friend. Children who are adopted, usually the school should have a people premium fund, and it would be good for your friend to go back to the school to inquire about that. Or if I don't know if your friend have adopted from the UK or from Romania, there's an inter-country adoption agency in London based in Barnet. Maybe to inquire also from them, how do you obtain support within the UK for children that have been adopted from abroad? There are some resources, and maybe it would be helpful for her just to explore what is available.
Thanks. Yeah, she obviously homeschooled during lockdown, like we all did. Also, she's been allowed to be like a personal assistant to her adopted kids, which was good. But, every year there's a new teacher. So you start back at square one, trying to educate them about these kids' background and all of that.
Okay, any sort of last thoughts or last comments?
I just want to say thank you, Juliet, for putting this session on, because really, really thank you so much for raising the awareness and putting it on. Thank you, and thank you especially for inviting Vonda in, because I've learned loads from her already.
Yeah.
We've decided we're going to meet up weekly, all three of us.
Well, yeah.
Bye.
I obviously I'm a big fan of Vonda. So.
You can join us too.
Yeah, we'll let you.
And Vonda is with an agency called Integrate, and Integrate, just quickly tell us about some of the services that Integrate, Vonda. I think that would be helpful.
Yes, so children that come to Integrate are normally children who are really struggling within the family. So lots of problems, often with violence, and struggling in schools, just struggling all around. And so we offer an assessment, a very good assessment. It gives a good idea of where is the child at, what is happening in the child's internal world, how is the early experiences impacted on them. We offer them therapy, work with the parents, we do training, We're running parent support groups for parents with children that are adopted. We are also doing private work, so all the therapists are trained in EMDR. And so we work with the parents and we work with adopted families, and we're also at the moment extending our services beyond that. I think Stefan is our business manager, and I think he has put up a link.
Yes, I think we did set up an exhibitors page for Integrate, didn't we? I think somebody's put some things on there. So there is that. If you look under exhibitors, you can find a link to their website and their services if you think they'll be beneficial in any way. Sian, any last comments?
I think I just want to end with a message of hope, really, just that, you know, we are so thoroughly blessed to have our children. Wouldn't want to be without them for the world. And I'm just so grateful that, you know, there is restoration, and just very thankful for that. There is hope. You know, our daughters, yeah, they are loved, and they are. That's beginning to absolutely sink in, and so I just want to end on that.
Yeah.
Hope.
Well, I love the positive message that comes from you both with home education, and I can really see how, you know, just thoughtful parenting, really thoughtful parenting that I think we can all benefit from, you know, hearing more about. We've actually gone way over. So thanks for bearing with us. And Ruth Barber says you are their champions. You're those children's champions, and I'm sure they are very thankful for you. And I know there are lots of families considering home educating, home educators who want to adopt. So hopefully they'll come across this video at some point and be encouraged. So thank you very much. And we'll give you a round of applause there.
Thank you very much. You've been a kind audience.
Thank you, everyone.